Hi, my name is Aurelie Shapiro and I'm a remote sensing specialist. That means I use space technology, satellite imagery, drones, cameras, and photos from airplanes to monitor the Earth and basically assess natural ecosystems over time. Now I work for the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, on forest monitoring in Central Africa. So in Mozambique, I worked on a project to map and monitor mangroves and coral reefs. Mozambique is on the southeastern shore of Africa. It's an extremely long coastline, lots of mangroves and lots of coral reefs and lots of people who depend on those ecosystems. So I was asked by WWF Mozambique to use satellite imagery to assess these ecosystems over time, and we wanted to know where are mangroves growing and disappearing and what is happening to coral reefs in terms of climate change and in terms of the runoff from land, the coastal development, and all of the different pressures that they are facing. Corals are particularly sensitive to increases in ocean temperature, and as a result, they can be severely affected by even small changes in seawater temperature, and this can basically kill them, and it kills a lot of the marine life that is associated with them. So a lot of people in Mozambique eat fish, they eat shrimp, they eat crabs, and a lot of these organisms that depend on coral reefs. And so with changing climate and increasing temperature, the corals are very, very sensitive, and then so are the people that depend on them. In terms of mangroves, mangroves are coastal forests which sequester a lot of carbon. In fact, they can gather more carbon per hectare than any other forest on Earth. They store that carbon in these deep, muddy soils and in the trees as well. So mangroves are really important in terms of mitigating carbon from the atmosphere, but they are also really good in terms of coastal protection. So they protect coastal towns and villages against things like cyclones that are increasing with climate change, sea level rise, tsunamis, and all sorts of threats. So the European Space Agency Copernicus program includes these Sentinel satellites, and in our work in Mozambique, we use Sentinel-1 and 2 to monitor and map coral reefs and mangroves over time. Sentinel-1 is an active radar sensor. That means that it can penetrate clouds, and it basically measures, let's say, the texture of the surface of the Earth. And so that's really important in terms of looking at the mangroves, in terms of the heterogeneity of the canopy, whether there are canopy gaps and clearings and so on. We also use Sentinel-1 to create land masks. So when you're mapping coral reefs and mangroves, you want to separate the image in terms of land and water. And Sentinel-1 is really useful for discerning what is land from what is water. So that's how we use Sentinel-1 in terms of our mapping for mangroves. We combine the imagery on land with Sentinel-2, which is a multispectral sensor, which basically observes data that is in the visible spectrum, near infrared, and shortwave infrared. And we combine Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 to map mangroves and their quality over time. We can map how well they're doing and how productive they are and their degradation over time. Then in the water environment, the multispectral sensor of Sentinel-2 can penetrate the water column, and we can use the red, blue, and green bands to map different ecosystems on the seafloor. So we can identify what is seagrass, what is coral, and what is sand, and we can map that over time very consistently. To convert satellite imagery into thematic maps, we use artificial intelligence. These are machine learning models where you train a computer to recognize specific ecosystem types from the image. So to do that, you need reliable data to effectively tell your computer what is where. And so for that, we needed field data. So we traveled to Mozambique and we went around with boats and drones and collected geo-referenced information with a GPS on the water depth, on the surface bottom type, and the different characteristics that were there. We also used what's called a glass bottom bucket, which is a bucket with a glass bottom where you can put it in the water and then you get a really nice clear view of the surface bottom. And that was allowing us to collect information on what types of surfaces were there, whether it was sand, seagrass, corals, or mixtures of all of those. We actually had a mobile app that let us collect the data right there in the boat, and it added GPS coordinates and any other information we had or we wanted to indicate. So that was over the water, and then we did a similar approach in the mangroves. So we went into the deep, muddy mangroves, and with our GPSs and cameras and drones, collected specific information on what type of mangrove species was there, whether there were presence of human concerns or degradation or deforestation or things like that. So we have a really nice, well-distributed field data set that serves as training data for the supervised classification. So the great thing about these machine learning models was that we are able to create really consistent maps over time. So the Sentinel sensors are flying over every 5 days and collecting lots of information since 2015, and we can then use that data to map mangroves and coral reefs over time using the same trained models. And what this tells us is it shows us where mangroves are disappearing, where they're growing, and where they're becoming more degraded. In terms of the water environment, we can see where seagrass is expanding or receding, where storms have maybe added new sediment or changed the bottom surface, or where potentially corals have been bleached. The information gleaned from this satellite imagery analysis is really important for local management and conservation. So when we know where the mangroves are and where they're changing, we can help restore them and protect them in order to sequester more carbon in the future and provide more important nurseries and more coastal protection. In terms of coral reefs, knowing where these ecosystems are over time helps us determine where they should be zoned. So for example, we can say that an area should be a nursery or should be strictly protected and no fishing should be allowed. Or an area can serve as a tourism or recreation area. Or we can have sustainable fishing areas. So all of this information over time really helps us zone and manage and make important policy decisions to conserve these ecosystems for the future. And all of this is really important to the communities who rely on these coastal ecosystems. So all the people who eat fish, all the fishermen, all the people who benefit from tourism, they need healthy coastal ecosystems for their livelihoods and for their food and for their security and for their health.